Right. Hey everyone, this is Librarian Courtney and Librarian Christopher, and we are here today to have a conversation with you about libraries in honor of National Library Week.
Hey.
So, yay! This is going to be a little different. It's going to be pretty informal. It might even get a little silly at times, but we thought it would be great to just hop on and have a chat with you and use this opportunity to talk about the state of libraries. So the first thing I think we're going to talk about is how COVID-19 has affected libraries. And so, yeah, Christopher, what are your thoughts?
Wow, jump right in with the hard ones. Yeah, so, well, I mean, everything, right? Everything is being changed by this, but I think libraries across the country of all types of libraries, not just academic libraries, but public libraries, specialty libraries, and all of them are being like they're being affected now to such a degree that it's going to be very difficult for us to not be changed permanently.
Right. That's such an interesting way that you just worded that, though, because historically, from the very beginning from the very first library ever, it seems like generationally, there's always that one thing that comes along that makes people say and joke about how, oh, well, I guess what's this going to mean for libraries, and what's this? And I'm definitely not making light of the situation that we're in now, but people said this when books on tape came up. They said this when the internet popped up. They said this when streaming videos and Kindle and Amazon. I mean, there's always something that makes people say, like, oh, I guess we don't need libraries anymore. But like, the ironic thing is, libraries just keep getting stronger and they keep adapting.
Right. And what's important about all of those things, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I have people in my family that are still like, why did you go into libraries? They're going to be dead in 50 years. And I'm like, you don't understand libraries, right? But something that, like, in our information literacy classes that we teach to undergrads, one of the things I try to focus on is there's a difference between information and information containers. And we're in the business of information. That is what we do. And people don't understand, I think, some people don't always understand that books on tape, Kindle, ebooks, whenever, audiobooks went to, there's Audible, but there's also the playaways, where it's like a little iPod you put in your, all of these are just different forms. They're different containers of information. The actual container is irrelevant. It's
Yeah.
completely irrelevant. What matters is what we're providing. And this is something that's really interesting too, because there are a lot of people I think that don't understand the services also that libraries provide. Though those services and those programs are just they're other examples of information containers. When you can go to a library and have a program that teaches you how to do a resume because you haven't done one in 20 years and all of a sudden you have to go back to work, that's an information container.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, and I think that's what really interesting. And then following things through, right? Following things through about what happens when these things affect us. So, like, I remember, well, Courtney, you and I were both in public libraries in 2015, and it was a couple. I want to say whenever a lot of the public libraries were negotiating with big, ebook vendors, right? It was really just a few years before that, like, it really started to take off. But for some reason, 2015 really sticks out in my head. It's like there was a lot of stuff going on then. We saw a spike in ebook use, right? And it was huge. And everybody said this is going to be the death knell for libraries. But what people don't understand, they don't follow that spike, right?
Right.
It it significantly declined after 2015. People stopped using ebooks in the numbers that they had because it was a fad at the time,
Right.
right? So I think those are just important considerations.
Yeah. And it's also, like you said, sometimes people don't often think deeper about what libraries are and who librarians are. And they have a tendency to think that libraries are just, warehouses of books or warehouses of books and computers, and they really forget that library, yeah, like we have all of those things, but we also have programs and instruction and the connections that we make for people. And it's really telling because I was just telling you about this article before we hopped on here that Forbes wrote. I am going to throw them under the bus here. They published an article citing actually a study from Johns Hopkins. So maybe it's not quite Forbes that needs to be thrown under the bus. It's both of these places. But some division out at Johns Hopkins did a survey to provide suggestions to governors about which places were and were not going to be safe to reopen economies and communities. And of course, they identified schools and weddings and concerts and all of those things as, not really safe to begin opening with. But then they said the things that are safe to begin reopening are parks and libraries. And when I read that, sometimes it's just like a punch in the gut, right? Like people still misunderstand like who we are and what we do. And obviously that article and that study, whoever is behind it, they think nothing more of libraries than as these quiet, secluded warehouses of books.
Mm-hmm. People, yeah, right. There's this false notion. People go in, they get the book that they want, they take it up, and you have a nice um, librarian who fits into like there's an entire literature on the stereotype attached to librarians, right? Um, that they're going to check that out and you leave. And it infuriates me because the people making those types of decisions obviously have never stepped foot in their local public library, right?
Right.
And we can see that it's also a privileged view. It's a privileged worldview. These are people who can afford to just buy books if they want. These are people that can afford to have internet. These are people that can just afford to have computers and have the technology and have even sewing machines. I mean, you can go to a local library, and many local libraries, not everyone, but you can go like our local public library here. You can go and get sewing machines if you need
Right.
that. And people who never have to stop and think about these things
Mm-hmm.
are people who don't use them, and often, I think, unfortunately, they're extremely influential
Yeah.
in this world, and so decisions are being made
Right.
for especially public libraries. I mean, and this is just a disclaimer. Courtney and I both come from a public library background, so they're very near and dear, to our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is very different coming from a public library background. For for example, a few years ago, there was another study done, and I was talking to Courtney about this as well, that ranked librarian as being one of the most what was it, the most stress-free jobs you could have in the entire country.
Yeah.
And I would cite it, but I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. And that's just absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
Whenever you look at, not only the services that you have to provide to everybody, right? Libraries do not discriminate. You are providing services to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when, you're confronted face to face with poverty,
Mm-hmm.
you're confronted with um, people with substance abuse
Yeah.
who
Mhm.
OD
Mhm.
in the library.
Yeah.
In
Children waiting at the door, like before it opens in the summer because they don't have anywhere else to go.
mm. And
Hmm.
then just standing outside because they really don't want to go home afterwards.
Right, right.
You know, it's
Yeah.
these misconceptions, they harm, you know, they they do more harm than good for libraries. I'd much rather there to be the opposite types of misconceptions. Like there can be misconceptions, fine, but I'd much rather them be misconceptions that help libraries than
Right,
hurt libraries,
right.
right?
And that's, yeah, that's a really good point because there's gonna be misconceptions about, any anything. I'm sure there's plenty of things that I don't have the entire picture about. But like you said, it's really unfortunate because so often financial decisions and other decisions are made. um I mean, there are a number of, public libraries who have boards, public library boards who really just fundamentally do not understand libraries. And some of the decisions that get made are just very counterintuitive to the goal and the spirit and the mission of libraries. Um, and this brings me to another point. I mean, um, the thing that I really loved about libraries when I was in high school and had my first, page, like library job as a page, everybody always just assumes that I got into librarianship because I enjoy reading. That's another one of those tropes, and it's like, okay, you're going to be hard pressed to find a librarian who doesn't like to read. I mean, there's probably some out there, to be honest with you, but that's such a that's such a stereotype, right? I got into librarianship because when I was young and had that first job, I thought it was so cool to see how that little public library created a community. And it was the same people. Of course, you saw different people throughout the day, but amongst those different people, you would also see the same core group of people that came in every single day, and you got to know those people, and you got to help those people in really interesting ways. I mean, there's another misconception about librarians, right? Is that they just sort of passively sit behind a desk waiting for you. But the really cool thing is that when people don't know where to go, they go to the library. And I think that's a really cool thing. And also the fact that libraries have become um, this third place in society, which was actually coined by this gentleman, Ray Oldenburg, in his book, The Great Good Place. um, and he talks about how libraries are indispensable social institutions for that reason alone, that they are these third places, that it's not your home, it's not your workplace, but it's this other third place that you can go and feel like you're part of a community. um, and I think a lot of people forget that libraries as physical spaces serve that function. I mean, what other institutions in our society can you just go into without needing to have a reason, without needing to buy a service before you use, like the bathroom? You can be there from sun up to sundown and nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to question it. Where else, where else is that?
Right, right. And um, it, it's interesting because you're not expected to buy anything. And that's what's really important, I think, right? We exist outside of that sort of mainstream capitalist idea that your worth and your right to be in a place comes from your wallet, right? if I'm going to a major department store, the idea is I'm not going in there just to hang out. There's an expectation, right? Whereas with, as you said, perfect, there is no expectation in a library. You own, in a sense, as part of community, part of that space.
Mhm.
You are what makes the space, and the space is what makes you. One can't exist really without the other. I think one of the misconceptions about libraries, however, to just sort of flip that a little bit, is that libraries are only the space,
Mhm.
right? So we can take that too far, the opposite direction. The libraries are only this sort of repository of books, and that's the main thing. But you can have an entire library that doesn't have a physical space. And for people who that may sound weird, I want you to stop and think about that.
Mhm.
You can have, and in fact, we can use the IU Southeast Library right now as an example of that. We have an entirely functioning library
Mhm.
without a physical space. Now, don't get me wrong, the physical space of the library is open, but the library building is not open as a library
Mhm.
right now. You can't go to the library and get library services. They're all closed. But
Mhm.
all of the librarians are providing all the librarian services you're used to in a virtual space.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong, buildings are important, right? They are important, but there's too much of a focus on them, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's too much of it, it's too much of a focus without realizing that the building doesn't magically, open itself. It doesn't magically provide instruction and expertise to you through like, some magical osmosis of just being near a book. Um, and a lot of people, especially we saw this more often in the public library, but a lot of people come to these places because they're lonely, and it's where they get social interaction, and they really count on those moments, and they get that at the library because, like you said, there's no expectation of them, and that's such a cool aspect of libraries. It's really unique. And it's also really hard, though, at moments like this, um, to manage that message. Because one of my fears is that, and one of the things that I've been trying to say through the social media postings and the email blasts are, is to remind people that, hey, the library physically is open for you if you don't have computers and technology, but those hours, those restricted hours that the building is open, is not synonymous with library access. Or should I say librarian access, right? Because you and I and our colleagues are the library. I mean, that's what makes it. Um, and so right now it's interesting because I kind of hate that it's taken a pandemic to give us this opportunity, but we have a little bit of a silver lining in that there's an opportunity now to show people that we are more than the physical building. We're not just a warehouse of books and computers. We're so much more. And we have an opportunity, I think, right now to really drive that home to people. Um, but it's really interesting to me, these stereotypes about libraries and librarians, which I know is something like we're both interested in. But um, speaking about IUS specifically and the stereotypes that our community has about us, a couple years ago, I did a survey of students about their stereotypes and perceptions of libraries and librarians. And interestingly enough, they had a very clear understanding about library as space and what types of services you could get. Um, the data seemed to indicate that they realize that we're more than just books, but they had very strong stereotypes about librarians as people. The most alarming stereotype being that the vast majority of them did not believe that we had specialized advanced training.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that was a that was a bit of a sucker punch. But it's interesting. I don't know where. It's interesting to try and think about where these stereotypes come from, um, how they play out, and how they actually affect
Right.
the day-to-day operations and services that we provide.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Because, library anxiety is a thing. You walk into this thing, you're overwhelmed by it. And then your likelihood to go up and ask, this person who's sitting behind this massive desk, and if you already have all of these ideas wrapped up in your head about what that interaction is going to be like because of stereotypes, or on the diametrically opposite hand, if you don't think the person sitting up there is a librarian because they don't meet those stereotypes, then that influences one's interaction, right? And then also one's enjoyment of the services as well. One of the things we try to do at IU Southeast, one of the reasons I love working there is that we try to make the nature of the interaction as enjoyable as it is informative. I mean, for us, it's not just a transaction. You come up, we want to know about you and what degree are you pursuing, and what's going on, and how is this affecting you, and how we can help. So we try to give that personal touch, because to swing back around, Courtney, you and I did that article together. For us, librarianship has to be summed up in only one word, and that is service.
Mm-hmm.
We are information servants, right? So not only service, but servants. That's what we are. And so we do what we do for you. Like, that's the reason that we're in it. It's not about that we like to read. Like you said, find me a librarian that doesn't like to read. You'd be hard pressed. I know one. I do
Right.
know one,
Yeah.
right? So that shows that is not the basis of librarianship.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but and she's a great librarian.
Yeah.
Not a fan of reading.
Right. That's such a, I'm so glad you said that, because, it's true, that there's these stereotypes, and they actually, I think we all know that stereotypes can be harmful. Um, and, they can definitely play out in, very real ways. But, the hardest part for me right now has been the lack of person to person, contact. I mean, we can still connect with people. I'm when I'm emailing somebody, I'm emailing a person. That's person to person contact. When I video chat with somebody, I'm talking to a person. But it's different when it's not, literally in person together. Because for me, that's the beauty of librarianship. That's why I got into it, is to basically be presented every single day with the opportunity to make somebody's life a little bit easier, in whatever way that manifests, which is another great thing about libraries. I mean, it's not the same stuff every single day. It's not the same questions. I love it actually when I get those really like left field questions, or like those really sort of bizarre questions. So that's been difficult for me, because I do think that is so much of that community building aspect is so central to my ethos of librarianship. Um, but yeah, I'm actually pulling up an article. If you have, while I'm looking through it here, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, no, it's interesting, because the type of that human to human interaction is so important. Because I mean, like a friend of ours, won't throw the name out there, but a friend of Courtney's and mine now, we first met at the reference desk with a reference question freshman year, and
Mhm.
now we can time it every Monday and Wednesday.
Mhm.
He comes in just to chat with us.
Yeah.
Still,
If he watches this, he's gonna know who we're talking about.
yeah, we're
Hey
talking about
man.
you. Yeah. But like that is
Yeah.
why we're in this field.
Hmm.
We know we were excited when he got engaged, and
Right.
we're some of the first, he came and told us.
Right. It's
Um, it's that
and
all
that's
started with an information question.
right. And that's not the only example of that.
No.
Like, he's not like the Lone Ranger out there. I mean, there's other people
Right.
that we have gotten to know because, they walked in because they were, I'm thinking about another colleague of ours that I won't name either for privacy, but wandered in, one Saturday afternoon because he couldn't remember where a certain program was being held on campus, but he knew that the librarians would be able to help him. And we still talk to this gentleman. We all just played a game night the other
That's
day.
right. That's right. Yeah.
But it's yeah, that's the magic of libraries. I think there's just something so poetic and meaningful about the fact that when people do not know where to go, they go to the library.
Right. Yeah,
And
we
it's
have we have people who, when they don't even know sometimes what they're asking for about, for example, the university as a whole,
yeah.
they call it a library. And that is so telling. But on top of that, those types of, another thing that I think has to be emphasized here is that when we are also educators, right?
Mhm.
The librarians, we're not just there to let you know, hey, we have this database and that's great. Our our expertise, if you will, is in information and the information gathering process, and
Mhm.
the evaluation process and all of that. So unlike some institutions where, especially like with a customer model, yeah, you're going to come to the desk, but you're not going to tell us, hey, I just need this for a report I'm writing. I need you to provide it. Here it is. We don't do that. The
Mhm.
entire process has to be an educative one, because we are also educators with the university. And it's not just us. Public libraries,
Yeah.
that's also a place where people can be educators. Now, I will say some libraries have adopt more of a customer service model, where the idea is, the more efficiently I can get you a piece of information, the better you're going to consider the transaction. And one of the things that I try to emphasize with my public library friends is that, we can still turn those instances of efficiency into moments of teaching and learning, right? Because I mean, libraries used to be called, I don't remember when they were called this. I may be getting up there, but I don't remember this. I mostly I've come across it in print, but librarians or libraries used to be referred to as the poor man's university, right? Um, Back, especially like when books were extremely expensive to have, right? But now I think we have to take that to an all new level, right? We have to take it to the level of, when you think of librarian in your community, you think educator. When you think of librarian on your campus, you think educator,
Mhm.
right? So yeah.
That's actually a perfect segue to mention a statistic that came out of the State of America's Libraries report that was just dropped today, the Monday of National Library Week. The American Library Association does this report every year. And in that report, they actually captured the fact that academic librarians provided information literacy instruction to 7 million students that year, this past year.
Nice.
Yeah. So,
And I'm sure that's lowballing it.
Probably. Yeah, because as we know, you can't, that data is never 100%, you never have 100% capture or response rate, right? So
Right.
yeah, it's definitely interesting. We've linked the State of America's Libraries report on our social media. So if you're interested in some more, some other factoids, like the fact that there's more branches of libraries than there are McDonald's in the United States. Um, and another thing too, this article that I was trying to find, I found it here, and I thought it was so apropos for what's going on in the world and what we're talking about. And this was written by Christian Laurison, a gentleman that I've met and listened to. He's a wonderful librarian and a wonderful speaker. He's actually the director of the Roskilde Municipality libraries in Denmark. I am probably mispronouncing that, so I'm sorry, Christian. But he wrote this article titled A Room is Not Just a Room, the Library as Shared Place and Why It Matters to Communities. And one part in here that made me chuckle is he said, my next question is, why do they always set the scene for interviews with academic experts in a library? He was like, I'm not sure if this is only a Danish thing. It's not just a Danish thing. So he says, well, there's lots of reasons, right? Like a library is easy to spot, the setting, right? But also it implies trust and it implies expertise and knowledge. And the fact that libraries are for everybody. And he's commenting here that he finds it pretty significant that there's a reason that the setting for a lot of these expert interview questions is in a library or a library-like setting.
Yeah. Building on that, also, if we think about it, in my time at IU Southeast, a lot of times marketing will do staff and faculty photos
Yeah.
in the library as well. Like, so
Yeah.
there's a parallel there.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah. And what I really like too, Christian goes on to say here, he says this article is about why public places matter, and specifically the library as a public shared space. But I'm not talking about library decor, library architecture, or library design.
Mhm.
And I think that's so important too, because so often when you start talking about that, sometimes your message gets lost in people thinking, that you're talking about, architecture or design. And those are certainly important things, very important things to consider. But we're talking about the social aspects of space.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question
Yeah,
like
go.
this. Um, before leaving public libraries, I remember I just started a new program and I was super excited about it. And I don't remember what it was called now, but basically the premise of it was we would read a book. So it was like an extended book club. Halfway through the month, so we read a book in a month. Halfway through the month, we would watch a movie based on the book, right? So I strategically chose the ones that we could legally show. And then at the end of the month, we would meet for the book club. But we would meet at a local restaurant,
Mm-hmm.
like a local restaurant and bar type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there that we discussed all the aspects of the book and the movie and our thoughts and impressions and all of that. We met physically outside of the library. But I argue we were making a library in that space.
Oh
It
yeah.
didn't matter if it was a pizza joint.
Oh yeah.
That was a library at the moment, just like now when every Monday I'm on my virtual reference for Zoom and Courtney on Wednesdays on her virtual reference for Zoom, we are creating a library virtually,
Yeah.
right? My
Yeah.
house, her house, your house, everywhere we are, all
Right.
connected. That's the library. It's the human connection,
Oh my gosh.
right?
This is so amazing. I don't mean to cut you off, but basically that's the slogan for National Library Week this year is find the library at your place.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I didn't know that.
No, but
So,
that's what's so amazing. I know that you didn't like know. I mean, I like didn't actually know that you didn't know that, but I mean, I intuited that you didn't. But yeah, the slogan. So the slogan actually started out as "Find your place at the library," because of course the slogan was selected long before COVID-19 was, even really considered in this country, but they quickly switched it around and said, hey, it still works, we'll just tweak it a little bit. And the new slogan is find the library at your place. And it is so perfect because like you just said, you do not have to be physically inside a library to be using or connecting with the library.
right.
And I think people so often forget that. I mean, anytime you, as a faculty member or a staff member or a student or whatever, anytime you access a library's database, one of our databases, for example, you are using the library.
Mhm.
Anytime you think critically about a piece of information that you read because of something we asked you to think about in one of our sessions, you're using the library.
Mhm.
You're kind of becoming a little librarian in that moment. And that's one of those things that, I know our colleague Maria will talk about this, is that the things that we teach you in those sessions are not just meant to be like one and done.
No.
Um, they're meant for you to be able to apply in any situation, academic or personal.
Mhm.
You don't really ever shut these things off, right? I mean, you don't think that that's what you're doing, but every single time you Google a question, like, why, I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of something I've Googled lately, but I just Google weird stuff.
Like if you come across an article that says if I inhale a blow dryer heat, will that kill corona?
Right.
Like I know it sounds, but that's a legit thing right
Right.
now going around. When you take the extra steps to evaluate and then compare and contrast with what
Right.
experts are saying, how you define expertise,
Right.
how you that the whole evaluative effort you put into it.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're mini librarians in that
Yeah.
moment. But what's important here to remember is that yeah, like everything you just said, and it's not a one-off. This is something that happens over the course of your entire life. And you know what?
Yeah.
The librarians may change because we get old and we retire. But the the library as human connection, as people who are always there, they're always going to be there to help you out, right? So these are processes that take lifetimes to perfect, if perfection is even something that can actually happen. But you know what? The one place you can perfect is knowing where the library is to go get help
Right. Or knowing
with all
who
of
to
that.
reach out to. Yeah. Knowing how to contact the library because you can get a hold of us in a number of different ways, like
Hmm.
physically walking in whenever it is safe, really to do so and interact with somebody, emailing us, you know, reaching out in so many different ways, having a book librarian, dropping in on Zoom. Um, it's interesting. I'm going back to this article still. And there's also like so many ways historically that libraries have been so much more than their stereotyped traditional notions, like libraries in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, um, libraries in the aftermath of rioting and social unrest. And really, in these places, um, libraries morph themselves into something more than. And I think that's really cool to see. And there's a lot of libraries right now that are becoming food banks
Hmm.
or other types of shelters to help with what's going on in the world. And so I think that's another really awesome aspect of libraries is that we are, um, they're so chameleon like, we're really easily adaptable. And we have been adaptable ever since the beginning, right? Because every single generation, like I said at the beginning, has something that makes people joke about libraries becoming obsolete.
Yeah, and something to just throw this out there to show like how intense it's been when fiction became like a big thing, like fiction reading, like think your novel, right? That's what we think of when we read novels, fiction. That was like a punch to libraries, and like there was this craze about it that people thought that, oh well, people won't take reading seriously anymore and all of this. Complete and utter, it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
We able to adapt and bring those things into collections, and but
Mhm.
just to show how like little things can
Yeah.
really be be big. um Something that I was thinking about as you were talking about that, because we were talking about the physical people, or I'm sorry, the people can meet outside of the physical space and it can still be a library.
Mhm.
But let's look at the opposite of that. So we're, so like I'm here, right? Which you can see my this behind me here. Can't
Mhm.
see the rest of it. The rest of my book collection. I have nearly 2,000 books at home, all in order, all cataloged. Seriously, all cataloged. I can access them. I can search
Right.
them.
See, like that's another trope. Like mine are totally scattered, but I know where all of them are. You ask me which one you want, I'll find it for you, but they're scattered.
Right. But here's my thing. Is it a library? I have a collection of books that are organized by topic and by author and by title, and they're
Mhm.
easily searchable. Is it a library? And the answer is 100% no.
Right.
And I never refer to this, the majority of them are in this room. I never refer to this as the library. It's the
Uh-huh.
office, right? It's
Yes.
the office. It's
Yep.
not a library,
Yeah.
um, because it's missing that component that for us, at least for you and me, and I would say all of our colleagues and
Yeah.
and majority of people that I know who are in this profession, it lacks that major essential essence, if you will,
Yes.
that makes it a library. And what is that?
Yeah.
Human interaction, human connection, community.
Yeah. Yes. So much. Yes. That's why like I get so frustrated, when people talk about they say um it I get frustrated, and I know that it doesn't come from like a place of ill intent. It just comes from a place maybe of some misunderstanding. But I get so frustrated when, people talk about um, the library being open, because it's like, okay, open, but we need a little asterisk right there, like we need a little caveat. Like the building itself is open, but like you said, the building is open, but it's not open as a library. I mean, it is open because we realize that certain things that we have are essential, you know, um, access to the internet and the computer is one of the services that libraries provide. And you said the word privilege earlier. It is such a privilege that you and I are able to be communicating like this from our homes, because we both have computers and we both have internet. But even before this, pandemic, it was really easy, I think, for people to forget that having reliable internet, or having internet at all, or having a computer at all, is really a privileged thing. And it's unfortunate. I mean, it should be easier for people to get those basic things. Internet should be, a right, basically, but it's still a privilege for some, that so many do not have.
Yeah, and there are, like I said, Courtney's been out of public libraries for 5 years. I've been out for 4 years now. When I left, because we both worked for a county library system. When we left, there were literally areas of that county, like significant areas of that county. And by significant, I don't mean large. I mean like they were like main areas of that county. You literally couldn't get it, even if
Mhm.
you wanted to. You couldn't get it.
Yeah.
And by it, I mean internet. Um, and I'm sure that's still the case. People think that, well, you can just, well, get internet. Well, you can't necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's something that we can do. And I think that brings us around to what you first talked about whenever we first got on. So I keep looking at my notes because I keep writing things down, is like how libraries are being affected by COVID-19 and this idea of buildings as spaces and all of this. I have been a proponent from the beginning that the public, right now, I'm particularly talking about public libraries. Public libraries need to be closed
Yeah.
as physical spaces, right? Whatever services you can still offer virtually, that's fantastic. And I applauded the American Library Association when they came out and issued their statements,
Yeah.
urging
Mhm.
libraries to close.
They
And
are all libraries. They did not differentiate.
yes,
Yeah.
that's true. And ACRL, which is the branch of ALA for academic librarians, they did the same thing.
Yeah.
I completely applaud them doing that. And here's the reason why. If libraries were to remain open, or if libraries were to open too soon, by nature of what we are, they'll become vectors.
Yeah.
And then everybody will have to quarantine again.
Hmm.
And people, like I said, like we said earlier, people who don't utilize libraries aren't necessarily going to know that there are people in there for long periods of time. If we police that and tell them they can't be in there, that defeats the entire purpose of what we
Yeah.
do.
Right. And that people gather
Mm-hmm,
and meet with people. They don't just go
mm-hmm,
there by themselves and hunker down and not talk to anybody.
mm-hmm.
Libraries are social spaces.
Yeah, you're not in some study carrel,
No.
right, for the entire time that you're there. And granted,
Your
that's the way
grandma's
things were
Yeah.
75 years ago.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
But you can do supervised child visitation at public libraries. It's a space where you can do that. And it's a space where that is done.
Yeah.
It's a space where people who unfortunately, they don't have homes, our homeless population, it's a place where they can go
Yeah.
and rest
Yeah.
and actually communicate with somebody. And in some
Yeah.
cases, there are food pantries and there are clothes drives and all these types of things. So here's, I think that there is an idea out there that libraries closing will somehow it'll somehow convince communities that support libraries that libraries are not essential, right? And it's the furthest from the truth. Libraries have to close right now because of how essential they
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And this the number of people who use them
Yeah.
and the ways in which they are used is why right now we have to say, for the good of the community, right, we
Mhm.
have to close at the moment. Schools are the same way,
Right.
right? They're at the backbone of the community. And for some reason there's a recognition that schools need to be closed,
Right.
but not libraries.
Right. Ugh. It's so, yeah. You've hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's another one of those misunderstandings that people have about libraries, and I really, I don't know where it comes from. But I think that's why it was so offensive when I was reading that Forbes article, to literally see them, see it in writing that they have not Forbes, excuse me, Johns Hopkins have recommended. Forbes just printed it.
They
Um,
published it, it's fine.
right? Yeah. But God, I hope nobody on here works for Forbes. So, they did this study, and they are recommending to governors that it's okay and safe to reopen libraries as one of the first reentry strategies. And that is actually, not only is it an egregious misunderstanding of libraries, it is actually dangerous to public health and safety. That
Yes.
misunderstanding is going to hurt people.
Absolutely. And then it's going to be hindsight is 2020. And I do encourage maybe we'll get legislators watching this. Hopefully we will. Any alumni out there, maybe. But
If you've stuck with it this far, then
yeah, but seriously, if you work in offices that are connected to town, city, council, or state level what's the word I'm looking for? Legislators, not just legislators, but governments, right? Um, tell tell your tell your people, before you do anything, why don't you try talking to a librarian? Talk
yeah,
to your librarians, at the state level, talk to your state libraries, talk to your county libraries, see how it's affecting them. Because I can guarantee you, a state library, a county library, a small little township library, right? One size does not fit all.
oh, right,
So
yes,
you need your school libraries. You need to talk to them and see how this is affecting them and whether or not they should be on that list. And don't take it from just, right. Use your evaluation process you learned from your faculty librarians,
right,
right. Go to the people who have a more well-informed stance on this.
right,
And that's going to be the librarians, not Forbes in this
right.
particular case.
Right. And that's what really worries me. If we're talking about the future of libraries right now. I mean, libraries closed their doors, back in 17, 18 with the Spanish influenza. And, we're still around today. So we will make it. We will get through. We will all get through this. But it really worries me if somebody like Forbes and Johns Hopkins are out there making these recommendations, because those are not necessarily institutions that I would just, poo-poo and push under the rug and be like, I don't really think they're so credible. That's another thing that was so scary about that article, is that people could, look at that as, credible information about, what libraries are and what they provide. And I worry about what the misunderstanding will mean for libraries when the world starts to return to normal. Will people, um, I don't know, like, will people understand that, we are more than our physical spaces? Or will they just be like, well, we got by just fine because maybe they already had a core information literacy skill set that we taught them or
Mhm.
that we helped to teach them, because our fellow faculty members also do wonderful jobs at that. So I'm not throwing anyone under the bus here. Um,
But also public librarians for people who don't
exactly.
attend institutions like IU
Exactly.
Southeast. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, if, if somebody is like, well, I didn't, they overlook the fact that, they access databases that's using the library. But who do you think curates that list of databases and maintains it?
And pays
Um,
for it.
and pays for it, and I mean, well, technically, like, they do through some of their money, but
Well, right.
you
Right.
know, but no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But I really worry about what, you know, um, some people might think about, well, the library was closed for so long and, I got by just fine. And, do we really need that space anymore? Or do we need X number of librarians in the world? Or, I don't know. I worry. I'm
But
really good at worrying, but
they're not seeing the people who are being, this may be irreversibly hurt
yeah,
during this period because they cannot use their public
yeah,
library,
yeah.
because they've lost connections with their academic librarians.
Mhm.
The quality of life also, right? Because of those human
Yeah,
interactions, um, the you you may not be affected, and then I think you have to ask yourself, are you a library user, right?
right.
But I can tell you, there are so many people, being adversely affected right now because they cannot go to a library
Yeah.
every day. And we've had a cold spell, relatively speaking, right? We've had a cold spell here recently. And I can tell you that the members of the homeless population who are used to going to libraries during those times to just get a brief respite from the elements,
Yep.
they're not getting that. They're not
Nope.
getting that right now. And it upsets me that they're not getting it. And I get it.
Mm-hmm.
So like for me that shows that they're essential,
Mm-hmm.
but their health also is what matters. And
Yeah.
that's why we also have to be closed.
Right.
Right.
Right. Because who do you think is operating the library? You know what I mean? Like, it's also for the public health and safety of your library workers,
Mhm.
and for the people sitting at the table next to you, because like you said, libraries are places where people, come to. And, this, I keep going back to this article. Seriously, if you guys follow Christian Lauerson on Twitter, he's amazing. Um, but he talks about how libraries create social infrastructure, and he says it so wonderfully in this paragraph that I have been like looking at for the past 10 minutes, because so much of what we're saying is what he's saying here. And he says here that social infrastructure is the glue that binds communities together, and it's just as real as the infrastructure for water, power, and communication, but it's harder to see. If we neglect social infrastructure, though, we tend to grow more isolated, which can have serious consequences. I don't know.
Yeah. It's, you know what it reminds me of, Courtney? I have to throw him in here because he's, he's an
Do
idol of
it.
mine. Hawthorne,
Oh,
right?
Hawthorne.
Hawthorne wrote a fantastic, I don't it's not a short story, right? It's more of an essay on this idea of the fireplace, the hearth, and a home.
Mm-hmm.
During the time when the stove, right, the wood burning stove became popular. And in the 19th century, and like they sort of became like, it was the technology of the day, and home after home was getting the wood burning stove. And he was sitting there in front of a wood burning stove, and he was lamenting this change. And he was lamenting it because he said that it's ultimately sterile. The stove is
Mm-hmm.
ultimately sterile, and that what a hearth does,
Yeah, tomato,
hearth,
tomato.
right? What it ultimately does is it forces the entire, in this case, the community of the family, to come together and congregate at a certain point, and that forces them to communicate with one another and talk about their day and talk about their bloopers and highlights, if you will. It forces them to sit in companionship with one another, because you have to be, like a fireplace is only effective up to like 6 feet away. So like you have to, whereas a wood burning stove is more efficient. Don't get me wrong, it's more efficient. Technology, like if we equate the stove to technology, it can be efficient. But he laments the loss
Yeah.
of that sort of that community, that forced community
Mm-hmm.
around the hearth.
Yeah.
And so now what I'm going to take that a step further and say is libraries are the hearths of the community,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are those places where you can come together and get those types of interactions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want what I'm looking at my notes. I don't I want to, I'm not saying we're going to end right this moment, but I want to change the trajectory a smidge.
Go for it.
It's kind of depressing what we've been talking about, because it's
It
all
is.
focused within
Yeah.
misunderstandings of,
Right.
and the
Right.
things that are going with COVID. But I would like to take a moment to really focus on how libraries have responded
Mm-hmm.
positively to these changes. And
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to see innovation, if you want to see people caring, if you want to see people truly understanding their place within their communities, look at what libraries are doing right now,
Yeah.
especially if you're somebody who doesn't use a library by choice or who doesn't have to. That's
Right.
fine. But I encourage you to start looking at it. I mean, we're seeing services like explode
Yeah.
because trust me, the librarians, just like Courtney and I talked about, it's very hard for us not being in the library. It's very hard for us not having that human interaction.
Yeah. That's what it is. It's the human interaction, where wherever we are, that's what's hard about it.
Right. And it's hard on all your librarians. It's hard on your public librarians. It's hard on your law librarians. It's hard on us all. And
Hmm.
it's not, I'm afraid, this is something that I'm afraid of, and this is just my own fears. I'm afraid, especially when it comes to public libraries, there is maybe a tendency to think that librarians want public libraries, well, libraries in general, closed so that they don't have to work. And that would be a gross misconception of what's going
Mhm.
on, because I'm
Yeah.
telling you, all of our colleagues in all the fields of librarianship are feeling this acutely,
Yeah.
because we're not doing what, we're passionate about this. For us, librarianship's like a calling, right? Um, so so we're finding ways, right? All libraries are finding ways to still help. You
Mhm.
have just an explosion of curbside services,
Mhm.
right? Where you still go to a
Yeah.
physical place and they're going to bring them out and you can return materials that way. You're seeing an explosion of mailing services, right? The IU Southeast Library, we've just started that. It's something that
Mhm.
I've wanted to do for 2 years. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of work to try to figure it out. But this gave us the impetus,
Yeah.
like, to really get that going so we can still get information to you in that way. Public libraries are doing that.
Mhm.
We're starting to see virtual reference, like we're doing. We have seen the library community come together and create consortia so that we can increase the amount of materials that we get to you. We've just seen Indiana University libraries partner with HathiTrust,
Mhm.
right? So
Yep.
that if IU Libraries owns a physical copy of a material that has been scanned into HathiTrust, you
Yeah.
can now access it digitally for the time being,
Mhm.
because getting you that information is important.
Right.
And then there's that. There's talk with libraries about creating tutoring services,
Mhm.
right? Because children are at home, they're not able to necessarily talk to their peers to get help.
Mhm.
They're not necessarily able to talk to their teachers one-on-one all the time. So
Mhm.
this idea of creating tutoring structures.
Yeah.
There's also ideas of I have an in with a specific library, and I'm just gonna say there has been talk about, just the idea that there are patrons who don't have anybody else to talk to other than their librarians.
Yep.
What can we do for those people? And
Right.
I know, Courtney, you have brought up recently on the IU Southeast Library social media, the Human Library Project. That, like,
That existed
talk about
well
that.
before COVID. Okay. Yeah. It
Yeah.
existed. What I wanted to also add is that a lot of the services that you just talked about are services that have existed prior to this pandemic. They just maybe were not the primary way of providing service, right?
Right,
But
or certain libraries had certain ones,
exactly,
and
yeah.
now, like,
Yeah.
we're all like, okay,
We're
let's
all
just do
sort of
this.
right transitioning.
Yeah.
But virtual reference has been a thing that you've been able to do for years and years now. Delivery to homebound patrons has been a thing that has been around for years and years now.
Mhm.
Digital resources and availability have been around for years and years, but like you said, more of us now are really amping up those services and creating using some of those like frameworks and creating newer services as well. But yeah, the human library was created fairly recently, a couple of years ago. And basically, the idea is that you don't check out a book, you check out a person.
Mhm.
and you sit with that person for a specific amount of time. The library will literally hold an event, at the library or maybe even somewhere else in the community, where you can physically sit down next to somebody and hear their story. And the goal was to get as diverse a range of people and experiences as possible, to give people the opportunity to increase their understanding, but also increase their empathy and increase that sense of like camaraderie and goodwill that you have. And so, yeah, the Human Library is a program that now is in over 80 countries, I think. And it's just, yeah, I think the Louisville Library maybe has done a version of it, but that's what's, yeah, the Human Library, which existed, like I said, prior to this pandemic,
Right.
So, and also another cool program that I thought, the gentleman, is it Dave Pilkey, right, who writes the Captain Underpants novels, chapter
Yes.
books for children. Um, I think that's who it is doing
That sounds right. I've
story hours, story hours where he's
Oh,
reading Captain Underpants.
and
But yeah, I
so
think.
many people, so many authors are doing that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's really cool, like you said, to see all of these services that are suddenly being made, even outside of libraries. Let's talk outside of libraries. It's really cool to see these services that are dropping their products, basically for either free or really
Mhm.
reduced cost right now, and it just goes to show you, I understand that these things, providing them to people, incurs a cost, right? There's a cost to all of these things. They can't operate completely for free forever, right? But I think it's really interesting. It goes to show you how much we have commercialized and capitalized information.
Exactly.
And maybe that's for a different like discussion and a different chat, but I think there's a lot to unpack there. And
Because it's a form of censorship.
yeah,
I mean, that's how much there is to unpack on this.
yeah,
Is when once you've commercialized it and you've put a value to it,
yeah.
you're automatically excluding
Oof,
so many people who can't have access to it, and that is the way to keep people in the dark, and that is censorship.
yeah,
So you're right, that in itself is it's its own conversation.
yeah.
But that's why, libraries, I brought it up. I didn't bring it up flippantly earlier whenever I said that, like, libraries exist. They operate outside of this sort of general overarching capitalist model. We have to,
Yeah,
for equity's sake,
yeah,
we have to.
right. Oh, I
And that's
think,
why you will never be charged. You may be charged if you print a piece of paper, right?
right,
But you're never going to be charged to go
right,
check out that book. And it's
right.
it's really interesting, the human library. I mean, think about this. This is, talking about containers of information, which we were talking about. Say you go to the library and you're interested, or you're doing a report on World War II, and so you grab a book, or you jump online and you Google it. But how much better is it that you have a library that was able to find a World War II vet that
Mm-hmm.
you can check out and you can
Yeah,
sit down with
yeah.
and talk to?
Yeah. Yeah. And let's talk about, even if your library or your community, of course, nobody is doing the human library right now because it's not safe, but check out the archives, check out the digital archives, go to the Library of Congress, go to Indiana Memory, or American Memory, any of those things. If you want to hear voices of the past, um, and there's something that the idea of the commercialization and of information. It always reminds me of, like, I don't know, maybe some librarians and some people would like clutch their pearls at this, but I was never really offended or bothered too much by items that would go missing from the library. Okay, maybe the DVDs would sometimes like bother me because it's like, man, how many times do I gotta replace this, you know? But but um but even that would not really, you know, bother me so much because um you know, librarians, like, we are responsible with our budgets. You know, we know how much we can afford to replace or what needs to be replaced. um so there's let me just throw that caveat out there. But I always like to imagine, I think there's something kind of poetic a little bit about the fact that somebody needed that information so badly, or they needed a storybook to make their life a little bit easier. They needed it so badly that they put it in their book bag, and they, you know, they walked out with it. Now, don't get me wrong, like, you do occasionally have like these grand schemes, you know, to take books and then go sell them on the internet. But I think by and large, the items that sometimes went missing from the public library were those instances where somebody, you know, just felt so strongly connected to something that they took it, and it's probably still sitting on their nightstand, like, you know, to this day. um, don't get me wrong, like, I'm not advocating for anybody to go steal library books, but let me put it this way. Like, okay, I don't think I've ever like publicly like shared this information, but I think I might have told you and a few other people. But when I was at the public library, there was a young person who came in one day, and they wanted to know where the self-help section was. And so, you know, I got up and physically took them over to the self-help section. And I was like, well, this is the self-help section, but it's kind of like broad. You know, there's a couple of banks worth. Is there anything more specific, you know, that I can help you find? And this person was like, well, I'm really looking for, where's your section on LGBTQ self-help? And I was like, yeah, definitely, we have that. Let me show you. So I lead them over, you know, to the books, and they're looking through them. And I was like, is this, you know, is this what you're looking for? And they were like, yeah, this is what I'm looking for. And before I turned to leave, I said, you know, just so you know, there's no limit on how many books you can check out. Just to let you know, you can take as many as you want. And they were like, no. They were like, no, I can't take a book. And I was like, what do you mean you can't take a book? Yeah, you get a card, you know, get a card, take a book. And they were like, no, I cannot take these books home because nobody knows. I have not come out to anybody. And I was like, oh my God, you just came out to me, like this total stranger in this corner of this little public library in a rural community. You know, and I mean, it was so meaningful to me that they felt safe enough to say that to me. But, you know, they also, you know, they said, I can't take these home. You know, if they get found, you know, I'm not out. Nobody knows. And I was like, you know, I told this person, well, you don't have to take a book in order to use it. You can sit here as long as we're open. You can read it, you know, take it in the library, wherever you want. And part of me so badly just wanted to tell this person, you know, just take it. Like, just put it in your bag. Don't even check it out. There's no record. Just take it, you know? Because that was another thing. They, you know, they were concerned about, you know, parental figures checking on what they had checked out too,
Right.
you know? And I always think about that when people start talking about, you know, getting so incensed about library books going missing and things being stolen, you know, and I always think about that person, and I always secretly hope that they did. that they did put that book in their bag and walk out with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a powerful story because, we're not gatekeepers.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the stereotypes, right? That's one of the ones that's still around, is that we are gatekeepers of information. We are not. Well, we will be the first ones to tell you that we are not gatekeepers. We're facilitators. Our goal is to make you be just as information savvy so you can do it on your own,
Right.
right? So you don't need us anymore. But if you look at, from the public library standpoint, the areas, right, the subjects that usually went missing, where books ended up going missing, they were topics that people were embarrassed to check out
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And so I'll be honest, like if somebody needed that, if somebody needed it, if it gave them any sort of comfort, or
Yeah.
if an LGBT teen took out a book and that prevented, another LGBT teen suicide, if any of that, if it benefited anybody,
Mhm.
yeah, I'm not going to
Yeah.
care that it walked
Right.
out.
It just
Uh,
gutted me. Like I was like, "Oh my God, I've never met you. You don't know me. We didn't even exchange names. I don't even think I was wearing my name tag, like um and I just oh my God, I just wanted to I just wanted to take that book off the shelf and just stick it in their book bag and just be like, go, just go. It's yours. Take it.
yeah.
Um because yeah, at the end of the day, like you said, we're not, the thing that's most important is not those materials on the shelf. I mean, the thing that's, don't get me wrong, like, those matter, of course, but the thing that's most important is how we connect people to those resources. um and that's why, like, when people ask me why I became a librarian, i I have to respond to them with a story about, like, that person,
Hmm.
or the story about the gentleman who visited the library because his wife had recently died and he didn't know how to write checks.
Hmm.
So could somebody please help him, how to do that?
And
Or
can we just stop there for a second? For anybody who's not a library user, please just stop and think about that. Didn't have anywhere else to go, didn't even go to his bank. His
no.
wife died, his wife took care of it. Where did
Yeah.
he go to get help?
Yeah. Yeah. That-
And you know
that's
what? That help was given.
yeah.
It was not, hey, we're going to send you to a
Hmm.
bank. It is, we
Yeah.
are going to be able to provide that help.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we aren't, like, able to immediately give it because maybe we're not, I mean, I helped that gentleman. I know how to write a check. I mean, balancing a checkbook, it's a whole nother matter. But
That's what an app is for.
luckily he didn't. Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. We also supplement our personal, like, knowledge and our, like, that connection that we're making with you. um, we supplement it with other materials that we have or other organizations that we know about. We don't just, refer you to something. We introduce you to a material. We show you how to use it. We give you enough skills, um, that you can keep coming back if you need to. And then at a certain point, you have the skill and you don't need us in that way anymore. But that connection is built, that relationship is built.
Hmm.
Um, and that's why, I don't know. Yeah. And I think that, these types of stories are like what, we remember, like, those people because we've become a community and you establish relationships with people and you see them on a regular basis. You notice when they're not there anymore, and you wonder what's happened to them, and it affects you when you hear that they've passed away. um you know
Or in our case, that someone drops out.
right, or somebody drops out.
We
And
we know that we notice when we haven't seen a regular I feel like we keep turning the library a little bit, or the discussion back towards public libraries a little bit, and that's fine. But
We're technically also, I think what people don't realize is that we, Indiana University Southeast is a public, institution.
right.
Um, yeah, like it's not exactly the same as a public library, but the public is able to, use our resources right now because of the public health and safety, of course. You can't, but when
And
things,
even then, you wouldn't be using the library. You would be
right.
using the library building for a computer, but you're not using the
Yeah. I
library.
mean, I have had members of the public, though, come in um, to get certain things, done, and create those interactions with them, though. It's not, academic libraries, of course, are different than public libraries in some ways, but I have had those patrons from the public that come in repeatedly for certain things.
Oh
Not
yeah.
not just because we're, we have books or we have computers.
Hmm. Oh,
Because they get comfortable, right? Like they find us and then they're like, "Oh, this is great," and unlike the public libraries, there's no time limit on the computers, right? And
right.
um we're much bigger than a lot of the public libraries in the area, but a lot of people don't realize that. It's kind of funny. I don't necessarily think I guess it's understandable that a lot of people don't realize that, anybody can come in and
Hmm.
use it. Of course not right now, so I don't want to talk too much about that and confuse people, but
Right. No, but we have people who come in who, for us, they're community borrowers,
right, right.
but they're students at different universities.
Oh
They
yeah,
prefer to come and use us
yeah,
as a library,
yeah,
and that is, it's humbling in a lot of ways. It also lets us know we're doing something right, right?
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's important. Oh, but it's based on, that community we built with them, right? It's not just that it's a fantastic place, which it is. The library, architecturally speaking, on the Southeast campus is absolutely phenomenal. But that in and of itself is not a reason necessarily to frequent it as much as people do. It's because of the
mhm,
human connections and the
yeah,
interactions, the relationships, the help they've received, the lessons that they've learned,
mhm,
the skills that they've honed and developed,
yeah,
right? That's ultimately what the library is. It's not the space.
right, right.
Um,
And it's interesting too, because there are parallels to be drawn, and in this article that, again, I keep coming, I'm just like fangirling about Christian Anderson. What else is new? Um, he's talking here about he has also worked in academic and public libraries, and he would always ask himself, why do people come here? And he would spend time just kind of, roving, the spaces and just sort of looking at how people are using. And he noticed that, yeah, of course, some of them come in to like get a book or to print something, and then they leave, public or academic. But the vast majority of people he noticed are there because, sure, they could be at home studying, but they're at the library studying, or they're streaming videos, or they're taking a nap, God forbid. um, or they're meeting with friends, or they're just relaxing, or they're charging their phones, and he talks in this article about how that's no matter what kind of library you are, that's across the board. Um, so I think that the parallels are really interesting to me among different types of libraries, but
well, because at the core, we're still
yeah,
libraries,
yeah, of course, yeah.
you
And
know.
but it's hard to, um, yeah, it's hard to, I think, reinforce to people that we are more than our physical spaces, um, because traditionally, I think that's just what people have assumed. And maybe a silver lining with all of this is that people will come out the other side maybe with a deeper understanding, in appreciation of libraries. Um,
Yeah,
and a deeper,
earlier.
yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, well, and I was just going to say, hopefully a deeper appreciation of it, everything.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, food, shelter, friendship. Um, yeah,
What are essential? What's something that's essential? What's something that's merely a want? No, that's something that what you just said was. I mean, like earlier, you said when we quote unquote get back to normal,
yeah,
and I do. I keep saying every time I hear that, I keep saying I hope we never get back to normal
yeah,
of what was normal before, because
right,
normal before was not working for a vast majority of people.
right,
And
right.
I'm hoping that what comes out of this is that we are better, we are
Hmm.
more compassionate, we care more about our neighbors than
Yeah,
perhaps we did before. We care more about nature than we did before. Um, and we stop taking things for granted.
yeah,
And libraries are one of those things that we have to stop taking for granted.
yeah. I think that's a wonderful place to end because I'm gonna have to upload this bad boy to Facebook or YouTube. And yeah, happy National Library Week to
Yeah.
everyone. If you made it this far, thanks for sticking with it. If you made it, ooh, should we do like a little, if you made it this far, like an Easter egg, like if you made it this far, let us know and we will send you something.
If you made it this far, it has to be because you liked us. Tell us you want us to start a podcast and we'll finally do it. All right. We've been talking about it for like 4 years. All
Yeah.
right. If you liked hearing us, you know, wax poetically on
Right, right.
libraries,
Right, right.
tell
Well,
us and we'll do
yeah,
something.
yeah, we will. But yeah, the Easter egg. This is an Easter egg. Yeah. Um,
We'll
they
give
call
you
them
one
Easter
free
eggs.
checkout at the library when things are back to normal if you've made it this far.
Funny. No, if you have made it this far, reach out, comment, whatever, maybe with like, and then yeah, reach out or comment, and I will contact you and ask like for your email, and we'll send you something.
A
Maybe
GIF,
just a picture of Hugh Jackman, but whatever. We'll send you something.
a really funny GIF with puppies.
Yes. Puppies and books.
Puppies
All
and
right.
books.
Now it's starting to go off the rails and we'll end it here. Cool. Happy National Library Week.
Thanks.